Steve here from Big Head Tech, and today we are building a gaming PC. This gaming PC, if my memory serves me correctly, cost me $504. There were some shipping charges involved with that, but that was due to me expediting some of the other parts. In fact, I expedited a part that's not here yet, and I'll go over that in a minute. But it is $504 and then sales tax. So I don't pay sales tax as a business until I sell this. I have to charge it and then collect it and send it to the state. So we're going to say technically this is $550, but when most people do like a build me for X amount, they don't include sales tax anyway. So we had to make a ton of compromises. I'm going to go over those. Do note that you're probably about $100 away, maybe $150 to really adding a ton of power. But if you're super budget, this is the video for you. So I've built $500 gaming PCs in the past. They've not been anywhere near as powerful as this. So to give you an overview, 16 gigs RAM, M.2 SSD, 500 watt modular 80 plus bronze power supply, 4-core 8-thread CPU, GDDR5 video card, grant only 3 gigs of VRAM, and we also have RGB. We have RGB memory, we have RGB fans, and I even have RGB cooler, but that's not part of the cost because I just have one laying around. So first things first, the heart, the soul of this is a board I just reviewed. This is the Gigabyte A520 DS3 or D2 S2H motherboard. Excuse me. Probably doesn't support overclocking. We'll figure it out in a minute. But $60. Can't go wrong. Has RGB and addressable RGB headers, 8-pin power connectors, all the connections we need. Then we have a set of gel memory, 3200 megahertz, CL16. You can save about $10 to $12 going on RGB, so do note that. Polar Master Box 311L, ARGB, $60. Can probably save $15 going to a less expensive case. I do note this is a M.2, not an NVMe drive. You can get an NVMe variant or something NVMe like for about $8 more. This is $47, and for about $55 you can do that. And then we have a Ryzen 3 3100. Now, where we overspent money, the case, the memory, maybe the power supply. Power supply is $60. It's really hard to get a less expensive power supply without really giving up a lot. Do note there was a 550 GSB stock for $55, but I missed that sale. I was like an hour late. I had it in my cart too earlier. But if you're only about performance, and if you can stretch a budget a little bit, maybe go down on the case, go down on our RGB, axe the RGB, and then you can get maybe an NVMe drive, or when the B550 boards come down in price, get a better one of those, or maybe a 3300X. That would actually be where I'd spend the money. It's an EVGA GTX 1060. It is a 3 gig version, but it was $100. I mean, can you pass that up? I mean, it is based off from EVGA, so it's secondhand technically, but as a 1-year warranty, and EVGA is fantastic to deal with. And if you want to be technical, I actually spend $94 on it due to the, I think it's the Build a PC code, and I'll put that in the link if I remember in the description below. So that doesn't help me, but that helps you out. So let's go ahead and get started. Real time, this should take about 20 minutes to do. It'll be a very quick, fast build. It's really designed for that. To be honest, I mean, we're gonna have no SATA cables. RGB is already kind of routed. So let's go ahead and put it together. And first, I do recommend if you're starting out to use an anti-static wrist strap. Also, on top of motherboard box is fine, or a wood table is fine too. I'm also on concrete, so there's really not much concern for electricity. But if this is one of your first builds, and it's never gonna, say that, oh, you're too cautious. No, it's just, I've built a lot of these, and I've probably only ever killed one if I had to take a hazard guess here. But simple CPU installation here. Now we're not using the stock heatsink. Couple reasons. It's not RGB, and I have an RGB one. I mean, that's pretty much the two reasons. That being said, if you were to install the heatsink, you'd unscrew these and then put the heatsink on and already pre-applied paste, and you'd screw them down. Basically, you start, and then you'd probably go back here, tighten down halfway, and then go back through all the way. Is generally how you would do that. The heatsink I'm using actually is going to leverage the stock mounting. It's from a 3700X. Put the memory, make sure the notch, there's a notch here, lines up with the notch down there. And I didn't line it up. Notch. I do that more often than I would like to admit. Very good. You want to be able to get in on both sides there. Same thing with this one. Make sure the notch lines up, which in this case it does. It's actually better to put pressure under it so it doesn't flex the board. If you're not careful, you can crack the board if you push too hard. Let's go ahead and get this NVMe SSD, or MSATA SSD rather, sorry, M.2 SSD. Man, my words are not working today. So the M.2 is right here, and oh, that screwdriver does work for it. There we go. Just like that. That's actually been debunked by every major reviewer out there. More is not more, but a little more is better than a little less. So we're gonna go, that should be good. So usually a decent grain of rice here. Now, like I said, this is the cooler from the Ryzen 9 and the Ryzen 7 CPU. So make sure this one goes in first. So lift it, there we go. And now we can maneuver this down. There we go. So you see how it's clipped into there, and then to secure it, you flip this over just like that, and then we will plug this in if we can get the reach there. Up top, just like that. So we're actually going to do the power supply first. This is a very, very simple build. There's just not much to it. So we might as well get this part done, get the cables we need. And this is why I like modular and semi-modular power supplies, because we're going to spend next to no time on cable management, because we're not going to have a lot of cables to deal with. So we already have the 24 and the 8 pin. So I just plugged in the graphics card ones, because we're going to need one of those here in a little bit. We're going to make sure this is facing down so it intakes air from the bottom. Let's go ahead and get this to line up. Usually it's better to do this with it sitting flat, but then I can't show you that easily how to do it. So just going to get it started most of the way so it can help hold the power supply. So what I had to do was I had to pull it up this way, because it actually fell towards the bottom, or this part of the case. Because again, it's better if you rotate the case this way. There's that one, and then I want to say, yes, I think this one's down here. So this last one you can go all the way down. It'll most likely have a little bit of resistance going in. Perfect. So now it's time to get the board in. First things first, before you go any further, get the I/O shield in. There's a reason to put it in. It helps ground things and prevents static discharge from the rear. While that is pretty uncommon nowadays, you just don't want the liability, especially if you're building this for somebody else. God forbid somebody sticks their hands into the back of the computer, and in a perfect storm, they could get electrocuted. And it doesn't take a lot of amps to do some serious damage. Now, I will warn you also, these I/O shields are always a pain to put in. I want to say this is most of the way in, so it should be good. Let's go ahead and take a look at our motherboard here. So this doesn't line up with this, so we know that we need to go down one, and then everything else should be good there. So taking a look, it's actually set up that way. So it's not in here, it's down here, so everything's ready to go here. Now it also has 2 extra standoffs over here. You can just leave those in, you know, especially to make sure you won't lose them later. So making sure that there's nothing sticking up. This actually, it sort of has a middle pin out. It doesn't, because you're still going to have to screw it down, but it works very nicely. We're going to open up our bag of screws here. And we're going to grab, I'm going to show you a little trick here. If you're not sure which screw you should use 100% here, what you can do is you can grab a screw and test it on one of the standoffs you're not using. So if you already have your board down, that might be a little difficult here. So, so it's actually in the case of this exact system, with these guys right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to start in the middle. So we'll get this one all the way down, and again, we're going to start doing some diagonals. Depending on how precisely cut the case is, I always recommend doing diagonals so you don't have too much shifting going around, because then you might have one screw that doesn't want to go all the way down because that portion shifted. So, okay, so what I'm going to do now, since we don't have the graphics card yet, I'll plug that in last, but I'm going to start wiring everything else. So let's first grab our 4+4. This goes to the top up here, and we're going to flip. I hate it when these are not together, but so this actually has a lot of room up top, so that's definitely a good thing. Okay, that one's in. We're gonna go 24 pin, which will come out right here. Put that 20+4 pin together here. Sometimes not the easiest thing to do. I always like to put my hand behind the board when I do that, so I don't break or bend anything. Okay, so we'll move the 6 pin out of the way for now, or the, well, 6+2 pin. We have the front panel I/O, which is going to go right up in here. So we'll do reset down there. Hard drive LED down there. Power switch up top. So top right power, top left power LED, bottom right reset, bottom left hard drive, just so you know. HD audio is this guy, and it's probably not going to reach, maybe. Let's see here. Oh yeah, this will reach. I just had to move it from under there. And that has the pin out the bottom, so we're going to flip it upside down. Perfect. USB 3. I'm going to come in from the side, and I really wish this was a different kind of connector. It's sometimes. And then we do have an addressable RGB connector, which is simply going to go right here. It's not a very strong connector. Okay, I'm going to assume it's in. I'll find out when I boot it up. And then we have a fan, 3-to-1 fan header, and let's just put that guy right here. This is a 12-volt DC, so it's not PWM. Okay, so now it's graphics card installation. You're going to think, well, Steve, there's already a graphics card in there. Well, yeah, kind of. This is an R5 230 or something. I actually don't even know what card. I want to say it is an R5 230 just due to the I/O, but I could very well be wrong. This is R5 220, excuse me. And this is from their B stock collection. So with EVGA and having such really good warranties and customer service, I will buy B stock products from them from time to time. And when you get a GTX 1060 for $100, yeah, it is time to buy them. Now this is only a 3 gig model, so a couple things to note. The 6 gig was $150, wasn't worth it to me, not for B stock. I can get a new RX 580 for that price, so that kind of made that the choice there. That being said, though, I only had about $100 to spend, so I had to be careful on you know, which card I got. And to be honest, I really had no interest in going used necessarily. I really wanted to go with something that would have some sort of warranty and a support line that people could reach out to if there were any issues with the part. So there we go. Took me a second to get it lined up. Not every case is cut identical, so from time to time you might have ones that you have to finagle a little bit here. Now, I will be departing with this system here once I'm done with it, but I will be adding in probably a Wi-Fi 6 card up here. It seems that everybody asks for Wi-Fi when I build computers nowadays. Obviously, I recommend against it, but it is what it is. But yes, it's a 3 gig model, so what you give up is a little bit of CUDA cores, and you do give up half as much memory since it's a 3 gig, not a 6 gig. So do keep that in mind. It's not the identical card as a 6 gig with just less VRAM, but it's 3 gig GDDR5. It is a superclock edition. It has a single fan. It takes a single 8-pin. So what we'll do here is, actually I have EVGA twist ties here, or straps rather. So I'm going to use one of them to, let's see, how do I want to do this here? Yeah, there we go, just like that. So just to go over real quick, the total was $502 plus tax. The Ryzen 3 3100 was $115. The Wraith Prism I had around the office, so to me that was free, but you could have used the including stock cooler. A Gigabyte A320M S2H cost me $65. The RGB memory, 32 MHz CL16 was $60. The 1060 3 gig was $94. The 512 gig M.2 SATA SSD was $48. The EVGA power supply was $60, and the case was $60 for a total of $502 plus. So here we're going to take a look at Cinebench first. It is a quad-core 8-thread CPU, so you can do some light workloads on it here. As you can see, it is pretty much at the bottom of the chart. It does perform a little bit better than the i3 10100, which is priced very similar to the 3100. Single thread performance, it definitely is lacking a little bit with a 3.9 gigahertz maximum speed. I was not able to get any kind of overclocking on it, even though the board BIOS does allow you to increase the multiplier. It did not help, but the multi-core was still a decent amount ahead, so 2350 versus 2100. Looking at Blender BMW, kind of very much the similar story here. It performed better than the i3 10100, a little bit behind the Ryzen 3 3100, and also behind the last generation i5 and the Ryzen 5 1600. Do note though, it's definitely doing pretty well all things considered. It took a little bit over 6 minutes doing the version 2.83. That is the version I used to test all of these processors. Now we're going to take a look at some games here. And first game we're looking at is going to be F1 2018, and on medium settings, it ran 162 FPS at 1080p, which is okay, but medium settings isn't that high. On high settings, though, we got an average of 103 FPS, and even on ultra, or very high in some cases, this was considered ultra high, 62 FPS. Forza Horizon 4 started out at 54 FPS on Ultra. For a racing game, higher FPS is a little better. If you turn it just down one tick down to high, jumps all the way to 99 FPS. However, going down to medium only gets you another 7 FPS to 106, so high seems to be the good spot there. Now, Division 2 starts off at 41 FPS on Ultra. Not exactly great. For an FPS game, you definitely want closer to 60, if not higher. If you turn it down just the high, you're right at that 60 FPS, 59 FPS to be exact, and medium actual crank on another 16 FPS at 75. And then you have Ghost Recon Wildlands, which is the most demanding game of the bunch. Starts out at 55 though, so pretty much at that good playable rate. Turn it down to high, you get 65. Turn it down to medium, you get 70. Do note when you go from medium to low, and I don't really think that's really relevant, but for both the Division 2 and Ghost Recon Wildlands skyrocketed well over 100. but a lot of people generally don't like to play on low settings. I think the sweet spot for most current AAA titles is going to be that medium to high range, especially when you look at some esports games and some older games. But speaking of which, as the title does hint, I have some World of Warcraft benchmarks for you. But before we get into World of Warcraft, I do need to go over a couple really quick things. We did 1080p. 2x MSAA. The reason why is I had trouble looking at nameplates, anything below that, so I felt comfortable there. Otherwise, though, I didn't change any settings. I just adjusted the slider from level 5 to 7 to 10. I'll show you here in a minute, but I basically, for the current BFA, I just went to Orgrimmar during like peak time around 7 o'clock, middle of the, it was on a Wednesday, and I basically just circled around the main area, which went by like the bank and the auction house and everything. And then for the flight paths, this is for Shadowlands, I went basically north to south and south to north flight path in Bastion. Without further ado, let's take a look at BFA first. And just for reference, this is the path that I took. You can see the arrows on the screen, just so you get an idea of like where I actually ran around in BFA. So taking a look, we started level 5 settings, and when we did the circle, we finished at 108 FPS average. The 1% lows were 65, just because I have that data, I'd share it with you. When we cranked it up to level 7, there really wasn't that big of a drop. We went from 108 down to 99. The 1% lows only dropped by 6. There's a bit of a steeper drop when we hit level 10. And that's why even on more powerful systems, you see a similar decrease from a percentage standpoint. You might lose 10% going from 5 to 7, maybe a little bit more going 5 to 8. But that last jump to 10 is a pretty big chunk. You're anywhere between 15 and 20%, and you really don't gain a lot more on the visual side. When we jump to Shadowlands, and keep this in mind, this is in beta, so this may change before live. I went to Bastion. I flew from the furthest I could south to north, and then back, and I averaged the 2. At level 5 settings, I was getting an average just under 197 FPS, which is obviously a little bit of a drop from BFA, but it's not apples to apples. The 1% lows were around 46, so still pretty good there. Moving up to level 7, not a huge drop. We're probably looking about 14%, a little bit more of a drop, again, than we saw in Orgrimmar and BFA. But again, this is more so rendering distances and textures rather than a lot of people, so it's just a little bit different. The 1% lows didn't drop by much, only by about 10%. When we crank it, when we go to that level 10, again, we're seeing that big drop. We're effectively dropping close to 30% on both the average FPS and the 1% lows. And that's pretty much kind of what I said on my last point is you generally don't want to run WoW much higher than level 8, most likely. Those last 2 or 3 notches add a lot of performance requirements from your system without giving, in my opinion, a lot of visuals. And especially when you start to do raids and stuff like that, just running at that high detail is just not going to do your computer justice due to the way that the computer is optimized. But as raiding aside, it's very hard to capture performance while raiding when you're looking at questing and Mythic Plus and capital cities and basically everything outside of like a cluster of people battling right next to each other. You can expect really good frame rate with really good detail in World of Warcraft and the next expansion, Shadowlands. So there you have it. For $504 minus the Wraith Prism Cooler, because I did not include that because that was a separate purchase. This was a $500 no compromise RGB gaming PC. Now, we've already talked about the fact that yes, there was a little bit extra money spent on RGB, probably about $30-ish. But I mean, yeah, where could you really get more? Processor, yes, but you're in a GPU bottleneck. Can you get a better GPU for $130? Not new or even certified refurb, like this is a B stock from EVGA. I mean, you couldn't do this 2 years ago. AMD Ryzen has done so much for the industry. That being said, it's AMD's fault that the industry was so stagnant for all these years because Intel had no competition. But you can get essentially a CPU that's very comparable to an i7 7700 non-K for what, $110, $120, something like that, whatever I paid for it. And then you can get a graphics card, 3 gigs of GDDR5 memory, that can run even some of the more demanding titles at high settings around that 60 FPS mark. Medium settings in some games, especially older games like esports games, even in the 100 plus. And then obviously the big thing is World of Warcraft. You know, I took a quick look at Live and Shadowlands, since I'm in Shadowlands beta. And you know, that level settings level is kind of the sweet spot that I usually run in. And I mean, we're even getting, you know, in the 80s. And granted, whenever we actually do raids, yes, that's going to drop. But you'll be able to go into cities and quests, do Mythic Plus and all that stuff very well. You might probably have to run level 5 settings and rating or turn a couple things down just because optimizations still aren't there because the basic design is still older. But man, for $500 for all that, I mean, that is impressive. So everything featured in this video, I'm gonna say I'm gonna recommend. Obviously, I've had everything for a far too short period of time to know the long term, like the A520 board. I mean, you know, I don't know how good of a board that's going to be long term, but it fits my need. If you want to buy anything featured in this computer, link in the description below. Like it if you liked it, dislike me, dislike, leave a comment, get subscribed, and if you do buy anything, by the way, I do get a small kickback from Amazon, do keep that in mind. But as always, this is Steve from Big Head Tech, and I'll see y'all later on down the road.